Everyone saw the photos, the wide shots of empty seats, the awkward silence echoing through what should have been the loudest arenas in women's basketball. For days, social media turned the WNBA Finals into a punchline, fans joking about $6 tickets, critics calling it proof that no one cares. But what if everyone was looking at the wrong thing? What if those viral images weren't the story, but the symptom of something much bigger? A crisis that started long before tip-off and that would end with the most powerful man in basketball being forced to step in. Because make no mistake, what happened during the 2025 WNBA Finals wasn't just a disappointing turnout. It was an implosion of trust, strategy, and leadership all at once. On the surface, it looked like a marketing failure, but underneath, it was something far more dangerous, a league on the edge of losing its own identity. Behind those empty seats was a silent battle, one that started inside the WNBA's own offices and ended with the NBA itself having to intervene. Now, the mainstream headlines told you one story. They talked about low demand, ticket sales, and attendance drops. They pointed fingers at casual fans, claiming they'd simply moved on after Caitlin Clark's rookie hype cooled off. But none of that explained why a league that just months earlier was being praised for historic growth suddenly couldn't fill a single row for its championship games. None of that explained how the WNBA's biggest success story somehow turned into its most humiliating collapse. To understand that, you have to look deeper, past the PR statements, past the feel-good interviews, and into the power structure that controls professional basketball in America. Because this wasn't about bad ticket prices or poor marketing. This was about leadership and how one commissioner's decision triggered a domino effect so severe that it caught the attention of the NBA itself. And that's where things get really interesting. See, when most people think of the WNBA, they think of it as a separate league, a different organization with its own leadership, its own policies, its own voice. But that's only half true. The WNBA operates under the umbrella of the NBA, which means in times of crisis, its problems become their problems. And this time, the problem got so bad, so visible, that the NBA's top executive, Adam Silver, had no choice but to step in. When that happened, it sent one clear message. This wasn't a bad season. It was an emergency. And here's the part almost no one is talking about. This entire disaster wasn't just predictable, it was preventable. The signs were there months before the finals ever began. Shaky management decisions, overconfidence in one player's star power, and a leadership team too focused on narrative and not nearly focused enough on reality. When that house of cards finally collapsed, it didn't just expose weak ticket sales. It exposed a deep structural fracture inside the WNBA itself. That's the story the headlines missed. The real story isn't about who showed up. It's about who didn't. Not the fans, but the leadership. The people who were supposed to protect the league's momentum, who should have seen the crash coming, and who failed to act until it was already too late. So while the internet laughed at the memes and the cheap ticket screenshots, something far more serious was happening behind the scenes. A quiet confrontation between the WNBA's top executive and her boss, the commissioner of the NBA. A confrontation that would expose just how fragile the league's internal structure really was. And that's exactly what we're going to uncover today. The chain of events that turned a PR embarrassment into a full-blown leadership crisis. Because once you understand the real cause, you'll realize this was never about attendance at all. It was about power, who had it, who lost it, and how one man's decision changed the direction of an entire league. So let's break it down. At first glance, it looked like a minor embarrassment. A few unsold tickets, a couple of bad camera angles showing empty rows, nothing the league couldn't spin or hide. But as the days went on, it became impossible to ignore. The 2025 WNBA Finals weren't just underperforming, they were collapsing in real time. Photos started spreading like wildfire across Twitter and Reddit, entire lower sections half empty, ushers standing around with nothing to do, and upper decks that looked like ghost towns. The screenshots became memes. Fans joked that you could hear individual conversations in the crowd. But behind the humor was something darker, the undeniable reality that the biggest event in women's basketball had lost its energy, its momentum, and worst of all, its credibility. The numbers told the story. Tickets for the finals, the very peak of the season, were selling for prices lower than a night out at the movies. $45, $25, even $6. Seats that had gone for over $2,000 just a year ago were now being sold for barely a fraction of that. And these weren't shady resale listings either. These were official Ticketmaster and SeatGeek prices. The league itself was struggling to give away tickets. To understand how shocking that is, you have to remember where the league was just months earlier. The WNBA had been riding an unprecedented high, record-breaking attendance, massive social media buzz, and television ratings that doubled year over year. Every highlight clip, every press release, every headline made it seem like women's basketball had finally broken through to the mainstream. It was supposed to be the league's victory lap, the payoff for years of slow, steady growth.
But when the lights came on for the finals, that fantasy evaporated. The hype didn't just fade, it disappeared overnight. Fans who had been fighting to get tickets earlier in the season now couldn't be convinced to take them for free. The contrast was staggering, a season of packed arenas and record ratings suddenly ending with half-empty stands during its biggest stage. It wasn't just confusing, it was humiliating. And the worst part? The WNBA's leadership couldn't explain it. Instead of addressing the crisis head-on, the messaging from the commissioner's office was defensive, almost dismissive. They blamed scheduling conflicts, venue size, and even market conditions. But fans weren't buying it. You can't claim your league is thriving while your championship looks deserted on live television. This was the moment the narrative cracked. The WNBA's carefully crafted image of growth and momentum was now at odds with undeniable visual proof of decline. Every viral photo, every sarcastic tweet, every headline about $6 finals tickets chipped away at the credibility of the brand. And once credibility starts to slip, once fans begin to feel like they've been sold a story instead of the truth, it spreads fast. Sponsors start to hesitate. Media outlets stop giving flattering coverage. Even the players begin to question whether the people running the league actually understand what's going wrong. That's why the empty seats mattered. They weren't just a visual embarrassment. They were a symptom of something deeper. A disconnect between the league's leadership and its audience. A gap between the story they were selling and the reality fans were seeing. And as that gap widened, one thing became painfully clear. This wasn't just about bad marketing or a cold streak in ticket sales. This was about a system breaking down. The trust between fans, players, and executives was fracturing, and that kind of damage doesn't fix itself. Because the truth is, no league collapses this quickly without help. Something or someone made it happen. And if you want to understand how the WNBA's finals turned into a national embarrassment, you have to look at the one factor everyone kept pointing to, the Caitlin Clark effect. To really understand how the WNBA went from sold-out arenas to half-empty finals in less than a year, you have to start with the one name that changed everything, Caitlin Clark. Because make no mistake, the Caitlin Clark effect wasn't just a marketing slogan, it was a phenomenon. She didn't just bring attention to women's basketball, she rewrote the rules of visibility for the entire league. Overnight, WNBA tickets became some of the hottest in sports. Fever games were selling out in minutes. Cities that had never cared about the league were suddenly hosting overflow crowds. Broadcast ratings hit levels no one thought possible. It felt like a revolution, the kind of breakthrough the WNBA had been waiting for since its creation. And for a while, it was. Clark's arrival injected new life into the league. She brought with her millions of college fans who followed her transition to the pros, national TV networks desperate to cash in on the hype, and sponsors who finally saw women's basketball as a serious product. It was the perfect storm. But that's also where the danger began. Behind closed doors, the league's leadership, led by Cathy Engelbert, treated that wave of popularity like a permanent shift instead of what it really was, a temporary spike tied almost entirely to one player. They mistook lightning in a bottle for a long-term business model. Every press conference, every media interview, every glowing headline about historic growth made it sound like the WNBA had finally cracked the code. But they weren't celebrating sustainable progress, they were celebrating a bubble. The truth is, the league wasn't growing evenly. It was growing around Caitlin Clark. She became the gravitational center of everything: ticket sales, ratings, sponsorships, even social media engagement. Entire cities were measuring success based on whether the Fever were coming to town. And the WNBA leaned into it hard. They marketed her like she was the league itself, plastered her face on everything, and reshaped their promotional strategy around her story. At first, it worked beautifully. The numbers were stunning. Average attendance up nearly double, viewership up 23%, merchandise sales breaking records. It looked like the start of a golden age. But behind that shiny surface, cracks were already forming. Because what happens when your entire ecosystem revolves around one person? What happens when that one star gets injured, fatigued, or simply misses the biggest games of the season? The momentum stops cold. And that's exactly what happened. When Caitlin Clark wasn't in the finals, the hype machine stalled. The casual fans who came to see her weren't invested in the league, they were invested in her. Without that magnet, the WNBA's broader story couldn't hold their attention. The same fans who had flooded ticket sites earlier in the year were suddenly nowhere to be found. And just like that, the illusion of unstoppable growth shattered.
This wasn't Caitlin's fault. Far from it. She delivered exactly what the league had been begging for: attention, excitement, conversation. The problem was what the WNBA did with it. Instead of using her popularity as a bridge to elevate other stars and solidify the foundation of the league, they used it as a crutch, an easy way to mask deeper issues that had been ignored for years. You could see the overdependence everywhere: broadcasts mentioning her name, even in games she wasn't playing, marketing campaigns using her likeness to promote unrelated teams, press statements framing her as the league's savior. It all made for great headlines, but it also created a dangerous narrative, one where the WNBA's success wasn't about the league anymore. It was about one person. And when that person was gone from the spotlight, everything else went quiet. This is where leadership should have stepped in, to balance the narrative, to spread the attention, to make sure the league's identity didn't hinge on one storyline. Instead, they doubled down. Commissioner Engelbert continued to deliver glowing reports about growth and record-breaking fan engagement, even as data showed that attendance was wildly uneven across teams. Some arenas were still packed, but only when Clark was there. Everywhere else, seats were empty. That's the part the leadership didn't want to admit. The WNBA's boom wasn't organic, it was conditional. A moment built on one player's momentum rather than the league's infrastructure. And when the finals arrived without her, the illusion evaporated. The audience didn't fade because of disinterest. They faded because the product they were promised wasn't the one they got. This wasn't the failure of Caitlin Clark. It was the failure of a system that depended on her too much. A system that confused a short-term spark with a long-term flame. And when that flame went out, it exposed something the league's leadership couldn't hide anymore. They didn't have a plan beyond her. Because underneath the headlines and hype, one question began echoing louder with every passing game. If the league's success disappears the moment Caitlin Clark does, was it ever really success at all? And that's where the real problem begins, not with the player, but with the people running the league. Because while the leadership was busy selling the illusion of growth, they completely missed the collapse that was coming. And when that collapse hit, there was only one person left to take the blame. For months, WNBA Commissioner Cathy Engelbert was everywhere. Glowing interviews, polished press conferences, headline after headline, calling her the architect of the league's rise. She had the stats, the sponsors, and the sound bites to back it up. Every appearance was a masterclass in confidence.
She spoke about record attendance, historic partnerships, and a new era for women's sports. To the public, she looked unstoppable, the steady hand guiding the league through its biggest moment ever. But behind the scenes, that confidence was built on a foundation that was already starting to crack. Because while the commissioner was celebrating the idea of growth, the reality on the ground told a completely different story. That's the problem with selling a narrative. Sooner or later, reality calls your bluff. And when the 2025 finals tipped off, reality hit hard. The optics were brutal. Championship games that looked more like preseason scrimmages, ticket prices collapsing to single digits, and fans online mocking the league that just months earlier they'd been celebrating. The league's leadership didn't just have an attendance issue, they had a credibility crisis. You can't stand on stage one week bragging about record-breaking numbers and then watch your finals struggle to fill 30% of the seats the next. It doesn't matter how many PR statements you put out. Fans see through it, and they did. Social media became a scoreboard of embarrassment. Every new excuse from the commissioner's office, travel fatigue, market saturation, competing events, was met with screenshots of empty sections and sarcastic comments. The disconnect was obvious. Fans weren't angry that attendance was low. They were angry that they were being lied to about why. That's where the leadership breakdown began. Not with the numbers, but with the trust. Engelbert's entire message was built around one idea: progress. That the WNBA was finally becoming what it had always meant to be: sustainable, respected, mainstream. And for a while, that story worked. It made sponsors comfortable. It gave players hope. It made fans feel like they were part of something historic. But when the cracks showed, instead of adapting, the leadership doubled down on the script. They didn't pivot. They didn't acknowledge the problem. They spun it. The result? A complete collapse of credibility.
Every corporate talking point that once sounded inspiring now rang hollow. Every claim about growth was met with a question: if things are so good, why can't you fill the arena? And every fan that once believed in the message started to tune out. Because when people feel deceived, they don't argue, they walk away. That's what happened in Las Vegas and Phoenix. It wasn't apathy, it was disillusionment. And the tragedy here is that the players, the ones who actually built the product, were the ones left to face the silence. They were the ones walking into arenas that should have been roaring, but instead felt like empty gymnasiums. They were the ones dealing with the awkward reality that the league's leadership had promised them momentum and delivered emptiness. Behind closed doors, even team executives were frustrated. Some quietly admitted that the league's internal communications had become a one-way street, top-down decisions with little transparency or accountability. When the finals disaster hit, everyone wanted answers, but no one seemed to be getting them. That's when the story changed. This was no longer about ticket prices or marketing. It had turned into a question of confidence, the kind that can't be hidden behind numbers or PR spin, the kind that erodes authority. Because once leadership loses credibility, it loses control. And when the people under that leadership, the players, the coaches, the sponsors, start to sense that weakness, they speak up. And they did, loudly. For the first time in years, WNBA players began to openly challenge their commissioner, not behind the scenes, but publicly, on record, without fear of consequence. What started as quiet frustration quickly became open rebellion. And when one of the league's most respected stars finally said what everyone else had been thinking, the leadership crisis went from bad to catastrophic. Because the next voice to speak up didn't belong to a fan or a journalist or a critic. It belonged to one of the WNBA's most powerful players. And what she said would ignite a revolt that no one, not even the NBA, could ignore. For weeks, frustration had quietly simmered beneath the surface. Players were watching the league's public image crumble, seeing the headlines, reading the comments, hearing the mockery. And all the while, their commissioner stayed silent. No apology, no accountability, just more talk about growth. But every athlete knows you can't fix what you refuse to admit is broken. And when it became clear that the league's leadership wasn't going to own the disaster, the players decided to do it for them. The spark came from someone who wasn't just another name on the roster, she was one of the WNBA's most respected veterans, a proven leader, a former Rookie of the Year, and a player who would spend her entire career representing the best version of what the league could be. Her name was Napheesa Collier, and her message wasn't polished or diplomatic, it was raw, honest, and impossible to ignore. We have the best players in the world. We have the best fans in the world. But right now, we have the worst leadership in the world. That quote detonated like a bomb inside the WNBA. It wasn't just criticism, it was a declaration of war. You don't publicly challenge your own commissioner unless you've reached the point of absolute frustration. And when Collier said those words, she didn't just speak for herself. She spoke for every player who'd been quietly fuming behind the scenes. Her statement opened the floodgates. Suddenly, other stars began to chime in, not with vague hints or cautious phrasing, but with sharp, direct condemnation. Satou Sabally, another all-star, spoke out about the league's lack of transparency and how players' concerns were being brushed aside. Others echoed similar sentiments in interviews and podcasts, describing an environment where leadership felt distant, detached, and unwilling to listen. It was no longer whispers, it was open revolt. Behind the scenes, things were even worse. Multiple reports surfaced of veteran players privately describing the finals as lifeless, embarrassing, even like open practice. These weren't casual comments. They were gut-level admissions that the product they were working their entire career to build was being undermined by mismanagement.
For the WNBA, this was unprecedented. Players had complained before, sure, about travel conditions, pay, marketing, but never like this, never so directly at the top. When your own stars, the faces of your league, start calling your leadership the worst in the world, the message is clear. The respect is gone, the trust is gone, the locker rooms have turned against the front office. And make no mistake, that's not just a PR problem, that's an existential one. Because when the players, the very people who are the league, lose faith in the commissioner, it creates a vacuum of authority. The power dynamics shift instantly. Suddenly, the players' voices carry more weight than the press releases. The fans start siding with them. Sponsors start asking questions, and everyone above them starts to panic. The WNBA wasn't just facing a fan backlash anymore. It was facing a rebellion from within. That's when the story crossed a line it had never crossed before. It wasn't a crisis confined to Twitter threads or YouTube commentary. It was now an internal emergency, a league turned against itself. And that's the moment the NBA could no longer sit on the sidelines. Because once the players went public, once the rebellion had a face and a quote that everyone recognized, the situation officially stopped being a WNBA problem. It became an NBA problem. Remember, the WNBA doesn't exist in isolation. It operates under the umbrella and protection of the NBA. That means every success, every controversy, every scandal reflects directly on its parent league. And when the headlines started shifting from growth to crisis, the NBA couldn't just sit back and watch. Enter Adam Silver. Silver isn't just a commissioner. He's the architect of modern basketball's global empire, the man who turned the NBA into a multi-billion-dollar brand that thrives on control, image, and precision. So when his phone started buzzing with calls from sponsors, executives, and media partners asking, "What's going on with your other league?" that's when the story stopped being about empty seats. It became about damage control. But Silver's version of damage control doesn't come in the form of public scolding or private panic. His power lies in subtlety,
in quiet, calculated statements that sound polite but carry the weight of a firing squad. And that's exactly what he delivered. In what appeared to be a routine media availability, Silver made a statement that on the surface seemed supportive. He said, "The WNBA is experiencing some growth pains. Cathy Engelbert has presided over 6 years of strong development, some of the best growth we've seen in sports. But it's become too personal, and we're going to have to work through those issues." It sounded measured, respectful, even diplomatic. But to anyone who understands the language of corporate power, that wasn't reassurance. That was a warning shot. Because in executive speak, the phrase, "it's become too personal," is a death sentence. It means the relationships are fractured beyond repair. It means the commissioner can no longer manage the internal politics of her own organization. And when Silver said, "We're going to have to work through those issues," that wasn't we as in support. It was we as in the NBA is taking over. It was a public intervention disguised as a pat on the back. Every insider in the business world knew exactly what it meant. When your superior publicly acknowledges internal dysfunction, you're done. The players heard it, the owners heard it, the sponsors heard it. Cathy Engelbert's authority had just been quietly revoked live on the record by her own boss. And just like that, the balance of power shifted. From that moment on, the WNBA was no longer steering its own ship. The NBA was.
You could feel the tone change immediately. Behind the scenes, Silver's office reportedly began coordinating with team owners, reviewing marketing strategy, and even discussing potential leadership changes. The narrative control that Engelbert had clung to for months was gone. The story now belonged to the NBA, and the message was simple. We're stepping in to clean this up. This wasn't a rescue mission. It was a takeover. Silver didn't step in to save Engelbert. He stepped in to save the asset, to protect the WNBA brand before it could drag down the NBA's credibility or threaten upcoming negotiations that involved billions in future media deals. And it's worth noting, Silver's move wasn't emotional. It was strategic. He didn't care about hurt feelings or public perception. He cared about protecting value. The WNBA had become an unstable product, and no investor in the world tolerates instability when the numbers are on the line. By stepping in publicly, Silver sent a message not just to Engelbert, but to every stakeholder watching. This league is still under our control. Don't panic. We've got it now. And while fans saw it as a moment of accountability, the insiders knew it for what it was, a quiet power grab. Because when the NBA says we're going to work through those issues, it doesn't mean collaboration. It means consolidation. It means oversight. It means authority has officially changed hands. Engelbert might still hold the title of commissioner, but from that moment forward, everyone in the business world understood the WNBA's leadership was no longer calling the shots. The NBA was now behind the wheel. And the question wasn't if changes were coming, but how far Silver was willing to go to stabilize what had quickly become a sinking ship. But here's where things get really interesting. Silver didn't step in because of PR pressure. He didn't do it out of sympathy or politics. He did it because of one thing: money. The WNBA's crisis wasn't just a bad look. It was a direct threat to the NBA's financial interests. And the deeper you follow that trail, the clearer it becomes why he couldn't afford to let the league spiral any further. Because what was really at stake wasn't just public perception, it was billions. If you've been following professional sports long enough, you already know one rule. It's never just about the game, it's always about the money. And Adam Silver didn't step into the WNBA's chaos because of ego or principle. He stepped in because billions of dollars were suddenly sitting on a fault line. Here's what was really happening behind the scenes. The WNBA wasn't just battling bad optics. It was entering one of the most important financial periods in its history, the CBA negotiations. That's where the players and the league hammer out the terms of salaries, benefits, and most importantly, revenue sharing. It's the moment that decides whether the next generation of players will finally see the financial respect they've been demanding, or whether the owners tighten the leash. But for those negotiations to go smoothly, the league needed one thing above all else: leverage. Leverage comes from strength, from growth, from the perception that your league is healthy, expanding, and valuable. It's what allows executives to demand better media deals, attract new sponsors, and hold their ground at the negotiating table. Now imagine walking into those talks with headlines screaming about empty arenas, $6 championship tickets, and a commissioner being publicly undermined by her own players. That's not leverage. That's blood in the water. In the world of billion-dollar sports, weakness is the one thing you can't show. Adam Silver saw the danger immediately. Every viral photo of those empty seats wasn't just an embarrassment, it was ammunition. Media networks could use it to argue for lower rights fees. Sponsors could use it to renegotiate contracts. Player unions could use it to demand more control. The entire system of financial balance that keeps the WNBA stable was suddenly under threat.
So Silver did what any seasoned executive does when his investment is in danger. He stepped in to protect it. Because make no mistake, the NBA isn't just a side project for the WNBA. It's a long-term brand investment. It's the NBA's proof of progressive expansion, a tool for public goodwill, and a way to build new audiences, especially young and female fans. It's also a political shield, an asset that demonstrates inclusivity when the NBA faces criticism elsewhere. If that image starts to crumble, it doesn't just hurt the WNBA, it hurts the entire NBA machine. That's why Silver's intervention wasn't spontaneous, it was calculated. He didn't wake up one morning and decide to help out. He saw a business risk and moved to contain it before it reached Wall Street. Before sponsors started asking if their money was safe, before the network started calling their lawyers about viewership guarantees. You can almost map out the thought process. The finals are tanking, players are revolting, the commissioner is losing control, sponsors are nervous. The next CBA negotiation is weeks away. Add it all up and the conclusion is obvious. If the NBA doesn't act now, the asset depreciates. So Silver made his move, not to save Cathy Engelbert's job, but to save the brand she represented. He wasn't protecting her, he was protecting the investment. And when the most powerful commissioner in sports publicly acknowledges that it's become too personal, he's not talking about emotions, he's talking about liability. He's saying in corporate code, we need to fix this before it costs us real money. That's why behind closed doors, NBA representatives began quietly reviewing WNBA operations. Reports circulated that Silver's office had started making advisory adjustments, which in corporate language means, we're taking control. They weren't going to risk the WNBA's instability bleeding into the NBA's billion-dollar negotiations with broadcasters like ESPN, Amazon, and Warner Bros. Discovery, deals that determine the future of both leagues. A bad quarter of publicity could translate to millions lost in leverage. So yes, Adam Silver stepped in, but not because of empty seats, or because fans were upset, or because players were angry. He stepped in because instability kills confidence, and confidence is what keeps investors writing checks. And here's the irony. The very thing that made the WNBA's collapse so embarrassing, its dependence on outside support, is also what kept it alive. The NBA had too much invested, financially and reputationally, to let the league fail in public. But that rescue came at a price. Because once the NBA assumes control, autonomy disappears. Every decision, every statement, every future direction of the WNBA now has to align with the interests of the larger empire. The independence the league fought to prove suddenly evaporates the moment it becomes a liability. It's the corporate equivalent of a bailout. The NBA didn't save the WNBA. It acquired it all over again. And the worst part? Most fans will never notice the change. The games will go on, the social media accounts will keep posting, the highlights will still circulate. But behind that glossy surface, the power structure has quietly shifted from Cathy Engelbert's office to Adam Silver's office. And if that sounds dramatic, it's because it is. Because when a commissioner loses control of her league and her boss has to step in to clean it up, that's not a leadership story anymore. It's a takeover. The only question left now was, what happens next? Would Engelbert fight to keep her seat? Would Silver install new leadership? And more importantly, what did this moment mean for the future of the WNBA itself? Because in the world of sports business, no move is ever just about today. It's about the next deal, the next dollar, and the next chapter in control. And that next chapter was already being written. When the dust finally settled, it was clear that the 2025 WNBA Finals had done more than expose bad marketing or weak ticket sales. It had triggered a full-blown power reset at the top of women's basketball. What started as a PR headache spiraled into a public rebellion, then morphed into a corporate intervention. And at the center of that transformation was one undeniable truth. The WNBA was no longer in control of its own destiny. Adam Silver now was.
It's easy to underestimate how rare it is for someone at Silver's level, the commissioner of one of the most powerful sports organizations in the world, to get directly involved in another league's internal crisis. That almost never happens. Publicly, commissioners protect each other's autonomy. They delegate, they advise, they don't intervene. So when Silver stepped forward, it wasn't just about optics, it was about ownership. The moment he said, "We're going to have to work through those issues," the hierarchy shifted. The NBA wasn't the parent league anymore. It was now the governing body. And for Cathy Engelbert, that statement was the end of the illusion. Her leadership, once praised as visionary, was now being quietly phased out. Maybe not immediately, maybe not with a press release or a dramatic resignation, but functionally, the power was gone. From that moment, every strategic decision, every public statement, every future direction of the WNBA had to run through the NBA's filter. The takeover was complete. But here's where it gets deeper. This wasn't just about leadership. It was about identity. The WNBA had spent years trying to prove it could stand on its own, that it didn't need to be treated as a sister league or a dependent project. For a while it worked. The Caitlin Clark boom made it look like independence was finally achievable. Sponsors lined up, ratings climbed, players' voices grew stronger. But then came the finals, the collapse, the revolt, the confrontation. And in a matter of weeks, that hard-won independence vanished. The league was back under the control of the same structure it had been under trying to outgrow. The board was reset, the pieces rearranged, and at the top of that new board sat Adam Silver, the quiet, calculated architect of basketball's modern empire, holding every piece in his hands. From a business perspective, it made perfect sense. From a symbolic one, it was devastating. Because whether anyone wants to admit it or not, the WNBA's future is now tied more tightly than ever to the NBA's brand, its strategy, and its leadership. Every move the league makes from here on will be about alignment, not independence. Every headline about growth will now come with an asterisk, the reminder that it came after a crisis so deep that the NBA had to take control. That's the trade-off. Stability at the cost of sovereignty. Security in exchange for identity. And yet, maybe that's exactly what Silver wanted. Because from his perspective, the WNBA isn't just a basketball league. It's a long-term investment portfolio. It's a brand with potential that can be optimized, restructured, and eventually repackaged for maximum value. By stepping in now, he can rewrite its narrative, clean up its image, and ensure it fits neatly into the NBA's broader global strategy. But for the players, the fans, and the culture that built the WNBA from the ground up, this power reset carries a haunting question. Was this a rescue or a silent takeover? Because the line between the two is paper thin. Yes, Silver stabilized the league.
Yes, his involvement might attract new sponsors, improve structure, and calm investors. But he didn't step in to empower the WNBA. He stepped in to control it. And when control changes hands in the world of business, it almost never changes back. In a way, the 2025 finals will be remembered more than a championship that failed to sell tickets. It will be remembered as the moment the WNBA lost its autonomy. The moment a league built on the idea of progress was reminded that even in women's sports, the ultimate power still resides in the same boardrooms with the same men making the same decisions. And yet, the story isn't over. Far from it. Because if history tells us anything, it's that power never stays still. It shifts, it adapts, it gets challenged. And as the next CBA negotiations approach, as players grow bolder, and as new stars rise, the same question that started this entire saga will return, only louder this time. Who really runs this league? Is it the executives who sign the checks, or the players who make the league worth watching in the first place? Because one thing's for sure, the WNBA may have survived the collapse, but it's no longer the same league. The board has been reset. The power has changed hands. And from this point forward, every decision, every contract, every moment of progress will carry the quiet shadow of that reset. Adam Silver didn't just step in to save the WNBA. He rewrote its future. And whether that future is brighter or bleaker, that's something no one can predict. Not yet. So now that you've seen the full picture, the collapse, the rebellion, and the quiet takeover, it's worth asking the question everyone's avoiding. Did Adam Silver save the WNBA? Or did he quietly take it over? Because depending on how you look at it, he's either the hero who stopped the bleeding, or the businessman who waited for the perfect moment to seize control. And maybe, just maybe, both can be true. What happened after those empty arenas wasn't just about basketball. It was about power. Who has it, who wants it, and who's willing to lose it. Cathy Engelbert's leadership may have crumbled under pressure, but what replaced it wasn't a fix. It was a restructuring. The kind of behind-the-scenes shift that changes how a league operates for years to come. And that's the part that should make every sports fan and every player stop and think. Because when the people in charge say, "We're stepping in to help," they rarely mean help. They mean control. They mean oversight. They mean ownership. The truth is, the WNBA will likely come out of this looking more polished, more stable, more marketable than ever before. The headlines will talk about recovery, leadership renewal, and stronger partnerships. But underneath all of that will be the memory of how it happened. The moment when chaos forced the hand and the league's independence quietly disappeared. So maybe the question isn't whether Adam Silver made the right move. Maybe the question is, was this his plan all along? Because if you follow the money and the timing, it's hard not to see how perfectly it all lined up. The public collapse gave him justification. The player revolt gave him leverage. The financial risk gave him reason. And with one statement, calm, diplomatic, and deliberate, he took control of the entire operation. No shouting, no firings, no press conferences. Just one subtle move that changed everything. That's how power really works. Quiet, strategic, permanent. And maybe that's the lesson here. In sports, in business, in politics, control doesn't always come from the loudest person in the room. It comes from the one who waits for everyone else to fall apart. So what do you think? Was Adam Silver's intervention a rescue or a takeover? Did the WNBA need saving, or was it manipulated into giving up its autonomy? Drop your thoughts below. I want to hear your full theory, not just a one-liner. Because the truth is, this story isn't over. The CBA negotiations are still coming. New players are still rising. And behind every press release and record-breaking deal, the real question will linger. Who's really running the league now? If you've been following this series, you already know. We're not here for headlines. We're here for the truth behind them. So if you appreciate deep dive storytelling, if you want to keep tracking the moves that shape the future of women's basketball, make sure you're subscribed, turn on notifications, and stay tuned. Because this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the moment the story changed hands. And the next chapter, it's already being written.